Hi, ladies and gentlemen. I am Beata Williamson and I work at the University of Gdańsk at the Institute of English and American Studies. This will be a lecture, not a presentation. I will not show you any films or interesting pictures. You have to listen. I hope your command of English is decent and you are between 14 and 19 years old. Imagine you are in church. This is 17th century. You are frightened because the priest told you that you are a sinner and most probably you will end up in hell, says the priest. The God that holds you over the pit of hell, much as one holds a spider or some loathsome insect over the fire, abhors you and is dreadfully provoked. His wrath towards you burns like fire. He looks upon you as worthy of nothing else but to be cast into the fire. He is of purer eyes than to bear to have you in his sight. You are 10,000 times more abominable in his eyes than the most hateful, venomous serpent is in ours. You probably didn't understand much, but look at it again at this text later on. The God that the priest talked about dislikes you, and he will punish you. But for our lecture, what is important is that the priest compares you, the sinner, the bad person, to an animal, to an loathsome insect, to a spider, to a serpent. These are perhaps dangerous animals, but in the 17th century America, animals and nature were not connected with God. Animals and nature was connected with devil. Americans had reasons to distrust nature. The sermon, which I just read to you, comes from the year 1741. It is actually 18th century already. But for the last 150 years, 17th and half of the 18th century, Americans were very much afraid of God. But this you will learn about later. This was the religion called Puritan religion. Maybe I'll tell you something more entertaining now. Jonathan Edwards, the priest who just delivered the frightening sermon, lost his job as a result of this sermon. His parishioners became so frightened that they petitioned authorities, church authorities, for a different priest, and he had to leave the parish. Let me tell you about another contact with nature by Mary Rowlandson. This was a middle-aged American woman. She was kidnapped by Indians in the 1670s, 17th century. She spent 6 weeks in the captivity together with her son. She was captured with her daughter, also 6-year-old girl, who died a few days after they were captured. Perhaps I didn't say it well enough. They were not captured peacefully. The Indians attacked the village, killed about 30 people in an awful way, killed the rest of the family of Mrs. Rowlandson, and took her and her son and her daughter into captivity. But then, when Rowlandson stayed with Indians, she was relatively safe. The Indians, in such situations, exchanged prisoners for their own. So exchanged a white settler for an Indian prisoner whom the whites were holding. Mrs. Rowlandson was treated well. The Indians, after taking her into captivity, provided her with food, took care of her child even. When the girl died, they buried the child, they let the mother visit the grave. They were kind to her. But Rowlandson, whenever she speaks of Indians or of nature, she connects them with devil, with something horrible, evil, dangerous. The forest is where Indians live. The forest belongs to the devil. Let's move to more optimistic matters, ladies and gentlemen. At the end of the 18th century, America gains independence. So far, I was talking about the times in America when this part of the land was a British colony. So I hope I didn't say United States, because in the colonial times, in the 17th century and most of the 18th, America, or what is today the United States, was an English colony. After the war for independence and after becoming a true independent country, Americans wanted the world to know about it. and they wanted to underline that this is a separate country, a different one. One writer, Washington Irving, had an idea. He thought that the most characteristic thing for a separate country in Europe is to have fairy tales, folk tales. America doesn't have folk tales. That's not true, actually. America had plenty of legends, but they were Indian legends. And as you know already, I told you a minute ago, Indians were not quite trusted. Indians in the 17th, 18th century were the enemies. So Indian legends could not be the folk tales of white America, of independent America. Washington Irving studied European legends, and he noticed many common attributes. For example, that in a European legend there is normally a couple of poor people or one poor person. There is a supernatural force, very often a devil. Sometimes a person sells the soul to the devil. These are stories, European stories from folk tales. So Washington Irving started writing folk tales very similar to those in Europe, but in which America is the setting. There is a tale, The Devil and Tom Walker, which I am referencing now. In this tale, a bad man and a bad woman, a married couple, try to deal with the devil. Finally, the man sells his soul to the devil and receives a lot of money. At the end, the devil comes, takes the man's soul and goes to hell. Pani Twardowska, perhaps you remember, but in Pani Twardowska, the devil did not manage to take the soul. Anyway, that was a digression. Well, in The Devil and Tom Walker, there is plenty of American nature. There are animals such as bullfrog, for example. There are plants, hemlock, and other alligators, yes. So the nature, animals and woods and plants are American. The setting is American, the tale resembles Europe. So here, Irving used nature for patriotic reason to show that America is America, separate, and has its own folk tales. Another attitude to nature, also patriotic, by one very popular writer of the 19th century, Susan Warner. Susan Warner was born in the city and when she was, I think, 18 years old, had to move to the country because her father lost the money and the city living was too expensive. Warner disliked the country, but she was also raised in a very patriotic family. And when she started writing novels herself, she wrote a very popular book called Queechy. It's a name of a farm. In this book, there are so many descriptions of beautiful American landscape and how wonderful America is, that at the end of the novel, when the heroine marries an Englishman and actually leaves the country and moves to England and doesn't live in American country anymore, it seems a little bit unpatriotic. Still, Susan Warner wanted to show that America is beautiful, even for those who dislike country. I need to add one more thing about Susan Warner and women writing in the 19th century United States. Imagine that to publish a book if you were a woman was much easier than to publish if you were a man. This was a phenomenon, American phenomenon. In the 19th century, women read more than men, middle-class women, those that had money and time. Many bestsellers appeared, and Queechy was one of them, typically written by a woman. I'll come back to women writers in a minute, but let's move to something philosophical right now. In the middle of the 19th century, ladies and gentlemen, Americans felt that their traditional religion, Puritanism, very strict, very unforgiving, was something not quite Christian. That this God, whom I mentioned at the beginning of this lecture, was not quite acceptable for a person in the 19th century. A new philosophy appeared. typically American. The name is Transcendentalism. Transcendentalism was a philosophy introduced by Ralph Waldo Emerson. If you continue your education, please remember from all the names that I mentioned today, you should remember Emerson, important American philosopher. He was optimistic. He believed, he claimed that we humans, God and nature, are one. We are a universal being, as she said. There is no difference. Well, this sounds quite philosophical, right? Humans, nature, God. Difficult to understand, perhaps. But what is easier to understand is that, says Emerson, if you want to be close to God, go to the woods, not to church. You can speak better with divinity when you are close to something beautiful, and nature is beautiful. Student or disciple of Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, put his teacher's teachings into practice. He decided to live in nature, away from civilization, and to check if he could survive and be happy. Survive he could, because he chose a place not very far from the city. So if there was any trouble, Thoreau could ask for help. Still, Henry David Thoreau spent 2.5 years alone in a hut built by the lake named Walden. He loved living close to nature. Henry David Thoreau took the advice of Ralph Waldo Emerson and lived in the woods. His lifestyle, his attitude to nature, his attitude to possession is very similar to somebody who believes in ecological living today. Thoreau said that you don't have to buy anything in the store. Anything you need, you can find in the woods or make for yourself. Well, perhaps this is a little bit too radical for us. But Thoreau said a few things that today perhaps we are interesting. For example, he insisted that we should simplify things, that our life is too complex, we have too much choice. Now imagine if you are going to the store and you are buying a box of cereal, how many different brands of cereal you will find in a supermarket. Or you want a new cell phone, you have enough money and you can choose any brand. There are so many brands for you to choose from. And said Thoreau, don't worry about complexity, simplify your life. Because, ladies and gentlemen, if you want too much, you have to work a lot. And Henry David Thoreau did not like to work. This was not ecological for him to work too much. So that was philosophy, and let's move a little bit to adventure. James Fenimore Cooper wrote 5 famous novels. I'm sure that your grandparents, perhaps even parents, read one of them. Let's look at the titles. They are here in parentheses. The whole series of the novels is called Leatherstocking Tales. Leatherstocking is type of pants that one hunter is wearing. It's supposed to sound funny in English and in Polish. Opowieści skórzanej pończochy. Leatherstocking Tales has 5 different parts, 5 different novels. You have the titles in parentheses. If you look at the titles and at the weird numbers I wrote by them, you will see that books were not written chronologically, that Cooper started with the latest ones and then finished with the ones in which the hero was the youngest. It has to do with nature, ladies and gentlemen. My complex explanation has to do with nature. When Cooper started writing, he wanted to improve America. He saw that Indians are exterminated, and American nature is being destroyed. In the first novels, The Pioneers, The Last of the Mohicans, and The Prairie, he protested. He underlined what wrong was being done to American nature and to Indians. In the last two novels, in Pathfinder and Deerslayer, he was older, disappointed, and he wanted to think about beautiful times when America was young and when Indians' nature were not in such danger as they are now in the middle of the 19th century. The Polish titles, ladies and gentlemen, I'll still come back to this because they are funny. The last two, Tropiciel śladów and Pogromca zwierząt. I read all of these books when I was a child. The Last of the Mohicans, perhaps you might even see as a film adaptation. That was a famous book. After James Fenimore Cooper, there comes another writer whom I would like you to remember, Mark Twain. One book, Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, you might probably enjoy today. Not might probably, you will enjoy if you are readers. Adventures of Huckleberry Finn can be enjoyed by a young person and by an adult. Adventures of Huckleberry Finn has adventures, but it also has a lot of violence, a lot of criticism. In this book, a boy escapes from his abusive father, and a slave escapes from his owner. I won't tell you about the plot, but when these two people who have to run away from something dangerous, when they feel safe, it is only when they are surrounded by nature, when they are on the Mississippi River or when they are hiding in the woods. Nature is dangerous, but you feel completely free and independent there. Both in James Fenimore Cooper and in Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, those who are surrounded by nature can lose their life, but they can also feel safe from other people. At the end of the book, at the end of Adventures, you find this sentence. This is what Huckleberry Finn says. But I reckon I got too light out for the territory ahead of the rest, because Aunt Sally, she's going to adopt me and civilize me, and I can't stand it. I've been there before. So he says that he would not like to come back to a very nice, kind Aunt Sally, who would keep him as his son, but who would make him civilized. Huckleberry Finn wants to stay in the wilderness. Nature for women was not so welcoming, ladies and gentlemen. If you were raised in the middle class, just that is the class that probably we all belong to, that is, we have enough money, we do not starve, we live in the city or in a rather comfortable country place. This is the class where girls were not taught to enjoy the woods and to enjoy the wilderness. Let me tell you the story of Mrs. Carlin Kirkland, very famous writer in the 19th century, or perhaps very popular writer. Her husband decided to leave the city and to start living in the wilderness, in the woods, I could say. He built a hut and he moved his wife and children to the woods. It was a very interesting adventure, but said Carlin Kirkland that when she lived in the woods, she stayed at home, she washed clothes in cold water, the children were getting sick, and the doctor was far away. Also, everything smelled very bad because the washing wouldn't dry. She complained about life in the wilderness when her husband lived dangerously, but when he had a lot of fun. He hunted animals, he was outside. She was inside with the children. Another writer, whom I already mentioned today, Susan Warner, the one who wrote Queechy, wrote another best-selling novel, The Wide, Wide World, about a girl who is moved from the city to the country. In the country she lives with her aunt, A farmer, very strict, very just, but not sentimental. The girl cries because she thinks that the country is hostile. People are unpleasant to her, they don't help her. When she goes out for a walk, she falls down and she dirties her white stockings. She falls into a stream and gets very cold. She's afraid of animals. She cannot go to school because it's too far and she would be too tired to walk. She's a little city girl. This girl hates adventure. But when you compare Susan Warner and Mark Twain, the girl in the wide, wide world and the boy who escaped with the slave, which one is more realist? I think the wide, wide world. A child in the 19th century, even if the child was a boy, would probably not survive in the wilderness. The wide, wide world shows a child afraid, as she probably was. One more writer, Fanny Fern, a journalist, somebody who wanted to do what she wished. And she liked to walk in the evening. But sometimes it rained, and she had long dresses. She couldn't wear pants, because in the 19th century, trousers were illegal for women. Can you imagine this? You had to wear a skirt in the United States. This is the law about which she wrote, a law more nice than just. So a woman looks nice in the skirt, but it is not just that she cannot wear pants. Fanny Fern borrowed pants from her husband and walked out dressed as a man. So her husband and Fanny Fern pretended to be two men on the walk in the evening. But if a policeman knew that she was a woman, she would have been arrested. That was illegal. And naturalism is another philosophy that you will learn about today. And naturalism claims that God does not exist in this philosophy. Nature is omnipotent, but nature is indifferent if you are happy, unhappy, or whatever. Nature doesn't care. I'll give you 3 examples. One of them perhaps is on your reading list. I think Jack London is a well-known writer. In each of these stories, you see naturalistic philosophy. In each of these stories, people are in a natural environment. Some of these stories end well, some of these stories end badly. And let me interpret them from the naturalistic point of view. In Jack London's To Build a Fire, the man is too stupid because he goes out in the temperature which is too low for a person. He doesn't pay attention to the dog. The dog, a natural creature, knows that it is too cold. At the end of the story, the man dies. But it is not punishment. He dies actually peacefully. He's cold and he, as if, falls to sleep, but he dies. He was fighting, he was brave, well, but he was stupid. He didn't pay attention to nature. Another story, The Open Boat. In this story, a group of the 4 men are on the sea. They are shipwrecks, and the weather is terrible. Some of them survive, one of them doesn't. Throughout the story, they keep telling themselves, perhaps we'll survive because we see sunshine. Oh, nature must be giving me a sign. I will survive. I've been on this boat so long, I must survive. It's not true. The men are fooling themselves. Nature doesn't care. One of them survives, the rest don't. The last story, Kate Chopin's The Storm, is a very immoral story, you might say. But from the naturalistic point of view, it is not moral, it is not immoral, it is just about life. In this story, 2 people do something wrong. A wife cheats on her husband, and the husband cheats on his wife. They do it during the storm. When the storm finishes, in a moral story, there should be some punishment for the people who sinned. But nothing. The man rides away, the woman smiles, and the story ends, the storm passed, and everybody was happy. Nature doesn't care, ladies and gentlemen. Nature doesn't give a moral. The last one, most personal slide in all of these, ladies and gentlemen. One writer whom I already mentioned, Carlin Kirkland, Forest Life, another book, and another writer about whom you will learn if you are at the university, Margaret Fuller, American feminist of the 19th century, who also paid attention to ecology. Both of these women wrote about saving trees. And I'm smiling now because many years ago, when I was doing research for my doctorate, I found passages in these books, in Forest Life and in Summer on the Lakes, very similar, that in the 19th century, somebody travels and sees a farm in the middle of a field. It is very hot. The sun, there is no shade. There is no single tree by the farm. The traveler asks the farmer, "Why? Why didn't you save any trees by your house?" Says the farmer, "Because I am civilized. I don't live in the forest." Trees have to be cut because you are civilized. Of course, I am ironic, ladies and gentlemen. And the last thing is, in the 21st century, the last time I was in the United States, I saw a house that my father-in-law just bought. He was very proud of this house. And in front of the living room window, there stood a beautiful tree. Past the tree, there was the view of a volcano, Mount Rainier, in Washington State. Also beautiful. And the first thing that my father-in-law told me was that, "Oh, this tree will be cut." I said, like, "Why?" He says, "Because it blocks the view of Mount Rainier." Well, I think that the Mount Rainier will stay there forever, but a beautiful, thick pine tree, I'm still sorry for it. Thank you very much.